Hi there, good morning everyone. Welcome to this wonderful event on sustainable cities. Now, our speaker today really needs no introduction, so I'm going to hand it straight over to him. He is Lord Foster, and we have a little bit of a presentation, then we have a Q&A and a lot of questions from the audience. So welcome, Lord Foster. The floor is yours.
We started a foundation called the Norman Foster Foundation in 1999, and we started it with the funds of the Pritzker Prize at that time. It funded professorships at Yale, traveling scholarships for students from all over the world, but launched from the London base, and that grew, and in 2017, from our headquarters in Madrid, we made a public launch of a program of public debates, of workshops for scholars, publications, think tanks, all on the issues of the city. Why the city? Well, if we think about cities, they generate 80% of global wealth. They also, on the downside, generate 60% of greenhouse gas emissions, and they absorb population growth, 90%, 2 billion more by 2050. What is a city? If we try and analyze it, it's obviously buildings. The buildings are held together by the infrastructure. Think of that as the urban glue. It's the systems of transportation, the parks, the public spaces, the main routes. It determines the DNA, the identity, the differences between cities. But vitally, it also determines the carbon footprint. And typically, a Western city is generating something like 4 or 10 times the carbon footprint that we need to achieve the temperature reductions, to address the goals of the Paris Accord. So how do we address those in terms of retrofitting the cities to improve their performance, to reduce their carbon footprint? How do we address the new cities? And just to put the new cities into context, for the next 27 years, every 2 weeks, there will be the equivalent of a new Dubai. So with that context, how do we identify separating fact from prejudice, from emotion? How do we identify which trends we should encourage in terms of the infrastructure of the future, retrofitting? What trends should we discourage? And how do we generate for the civic leaders of the future, those who will be determining the future of generations to come, how do we teach them in terms of engaging with communities for a ground-up approach, for generating leadership? It was an awareness of those issues that led us to create the Institute, and its first course, starting in January next year, will be bringing together students from 21 countries on 7 continents. What makes it different from other courses? I would suggest uniquely it brings together the best of academia, because over the earlier program that I mentioned, we'd paired mentors, world-class leading figures from politics, science, computing, every walk of life that impinges and determines the destiny of cities of the future. We combine that with hands-on experience in 3 pilot cities. The first pilot cities will be European. The later ones will probably be informal settlements, Asian cities, Latin American cities. But the approach, the techniques will be universal to all cities of all kinds. At the heart of this will be a laboratory. It will use the most cutting-edge technology which is available, which we've invested in. We've also created a custom building 2 stories for this facility, which is within a few minutes' walk of the main headquarters of the foundation with its teaching spaces. So we'll be able to create a digital twin of a city, explore the implications in an interactive way using the database which is publicly obtainable and the database from the cities themselves to create customized programs so that you can see if you plant trees exactly where you would do it and the effects in terms of air quality, only one of many examples. There's a very, very short film which summarizes some of what I've said. I will be leading this institute with a co-director, Kent Larson, who heads out the City Lab at MIT, and together with a group of academics and so on. At the end of this one-year course, there will be a master's degree, and that has been recognized by the Autonomous University of Madrid, one of the leading universities in Europe, and we will be in partnership on that project. So, very, very briefly, the film. Since its launch in 2017, the Norman Foster Foundation has promoted interdisciplinary working and research to enable new generations to anticipate the future. Building on that tradition, we've now created a new initiative of the Foundation, the Norman Foster Institute. It's addressed in a time of climate change to all of those who either through education or practice wish to improve the quality of urban life in cities worldwide. The course will combine practical, hands-on experience directly in cities, alongside academic inputs from the network of foundation experts, politicians, consultants, professors, developers. They'll learn how to interpret data using the most up-to-date digital tools in the quest to improve a sustainable quality of urban life.
To join minutes, and also welcome to everyone who's joining online. I think we have hundreds of people actually watching. So, Lord Foster, something that strikes me is that you talk about quality of life in cities. And this it means that our cities that are livable, so it's not only to combat climate change, but where it's pleasant and makes people happy. How do you define that? What is the city of tomorrow?
The city of tomorrow is the city which could be and should be today. So what is good for the climate is also good for the individual. And I think that there's a dangerous misconception, and that is that somehow, if we have to address climate change, we're going to have to change our way of life for the worse, that we're going to have to make sacrifices. I would suggest that everything that is good for the planet is good for the people who live on the planet. So, for example, planting trees is improving the quality of the air. It's absorbing carbon in the way that the oceans absorb. It's encouraging biodiversity. If we make the transition to clean energy, and we have an abundance of clean energy, we can also address big issues of inequality. Over 1 billion people on the planet don't have everything that we take for granted, the ability to throw a switch, have a light, cook, by poor air quality, 7 to 10 million people, most of them kids who are growing up next to a coal fire or a wood fire or animal waste to heat and cook. So we need an abundance of energy. I mean, Nigeria, for example, by its own research, has concluded that to cope with population growth and also industrialization needs 15 times the amount of energy that it's consuming at the moment. And we know that we have clean sources of energy, which are carbon-free, but we need to use that technology.
I know it's something that mayors are looking at very closely because cities make up a huge amount, of course, of carbon emissions. So also by retrofitting a lot of the buildings, it makes a huge difference to how we can achieve the goals.
Yes, I think the emphasis on recycling, whether it's recycling waste to energy, whether it's recycling an obsolete building rather than demolishing it, that's not to say that there won't be a need for new buildings. But if you take some of the new workplace buildings, which are moving more volumes of air, they're greener buildings. We know from scientific studies from Harvard that people are healthier in those buildings, and those buildings reduce the carbon footprint. So if that replaces an old building, imagine an old office tower with a central core. The spaces are shallow. The floor-to-ceiling heights are not ideal for today's workplace, but they're perfect to recycle into accommodation. And a lot of those buildings are in debt. They're owned by banks. Imagine a collusion between the banks who own those buildings, the local authorities that have the issues of the people who run the city, the firemen, the nurses, the policemen, who by rental values are pushed into the suburbs with long, unsustainable commutes. Imagine that out of that partnership, there was a rezoning, that you relaxed the rules in terms of which area could be residential, which area was the workplace. It would be a win-win. And part of the development package, for example, would be that an agreed proportion of those spaces would be available for key workers. That's not a new idea. I mean, it's in place in cities like Vienna. I could elaborate on that.
So first of all, also communicate with mayors. I know we have a couple of delegations. How do you start the conversation to actually do a city that fits what they're trying to achieve?
I think that there are various initiatives which bring mayors together with vital information. Out of this project, we engage each year with 3 cities. So those cities, through their administrators, through their mayors, the civic leaders, will be immersed in the realities that I'm described and will be guided in terms of how their city should develop. There's, in many ways, it's not reinventing the wheel. It's learning from the lessons of the past. For example, if you take the different kinds of cities, there are those cities that sprawl endlessly into the countryside, eating up precious countryside. There are the compact cities, which are walkable, pedestrian-friendly. And statistically, those kind of cities use less energy. Their carbon footprint is less. And even if you're not interested in that, you say, I don't give a, for sustainability, all the polls for magazines like Forbes, Financial Times, they list cities which people want to visit, the top 10 cities where people want to bring up a family and work. They're all compact cities. So it's learning from that and concentrating, learning from those lessons and applying them.
Where's the city where you've seen the biggest transformation?
I think that professionally, I've been involved with cities I've been part of the team creating master plans. I've seen those master plans evolve over time. I've seen a city like Bilbao or a city like Duisburg go through the traumas of Rust Belt, declining heavy industries, and I've seen those cities transform, and they've become meccas for tourists, for clean industries, for greening. So I've seen and been involved in many of these firsthand, working with civic leaders.
Lord Foster, there's also something that actually the Institute works on, which is a pod, which I think we'll see in just a second. And this is, talk to me about this.
Well, this grew out of a workshop, and the workshop, which was sponsored by Holcim, addressed the refugee issue. And the students learned that the average time in a refugee camp was 17 years. They heard this kind of directly from people on sites in Syria and so on. And the standard issue was a tent. And a tent normally lasts about a year. And there's a very sophisticated tent, which is made by IKEA, designed by a Swedish designer, who participated. And we erected this tent. And I was part of the team that erected it. And it was, I mean, in a controlled climate with no kind of crises, it was very, very challenging. So the students said, what happens if you do something more permanent, more quickly? And the result, if you just go back to the previous one, that's the inside, because Holcim came back, the workshop was in June. In August, they said, do you think you could prove the point to the students and create something which was essentially permanent and built in a few days? And it's there in Venice. And the interesting thing is when everybody saw it, they just fell in love with it. They wanted to have one, to live in it. That idea has been picked up by the government of Costa Rica, and we're on course to be able to deliver, based on this prototype, to deliver a 2-bedroom house with bathroom and kitchen for $16,500.
And this
is the imagery of it.
And it's all sustainable, and it's built extremely quickly.
It has a dramatically reduced carbon footprint compared with its traditional alternative, and it can be built very quickly. It uses a material which hasn't been used in building before, not for buildings. It's a canvas. It's impregnated with low carbon concrete. You can erect it over a temporary formwork as a very economical arch. You spray it with water, it's hard in a few hours, and it's structurally rigid in 24 hours. And that then has an inner layer prefabricated of insulation. It can also be covered by landscape. I mean, it can, so if you imagine that somebody has this, over time, they could literally heap earth over the top of it and grow grass and trees, giving it more insulation.
Would your perfect city be walkable?
I would insist on it. And if you take there are a whole series quite recently of books and films on people who are the healthiest on the planet and who live 100 and more. And there are 3 common denominators. These groups of people live in very, very diverse places. They all have to walk every day. So the walkable city is healthy in that respect. They have a good diet, and urban farming, for example, could reuse an obsolescent car park. It would deliver fresh food on the doorstep of the city. Social inclusion is the other factor. And there's a very interesting thing from our recent travels, realized in Singapore that everybody has access to a home. but there are extra financial incentives if those young couples take a location close to their parents. Again, progressive legislation can encourage these health-giving things. But the compact city has many of these ingredients.
When you look at your institute, a lot of the opportunities that you see, you also evaluate some of the challenges. What do you think is the biggest challenge right now for cities?
I think the biggest challenge is emotion and prejudice over facts. And particularly when it comes to issues of energy. So leadership and advocacy is about access to real data. In the end, true statistics can't lie. They're the basis on making decisions.
Thank you, Lord Foster. So now we have questions from the floor. If you'd like, I know many people were very excited to speak to Lord Foster, so please don't be shy. I think I have a question here probably at the front. If you just have a quick show of hands. I'm not sure if we have a microphone, but I think we can hear you if you project. Otherwise, I'll re-say it. I can give you mine. I can project.
Yes, it's lovely to have you, Lord Foster. Actually, I'm a big fan of yours, and I'm also in charge of the pavilion, so it's quite an honor. You mentioned Vienna, so that struck me because I'm from Vienna. It's my favorite city. I was just curious, which is your favorite city? And where do you see, what kind of other cities do you think are on track to becoming more sustainable, or maybe going more on that kind of Viennese model of being compact, very efficient, and having a very high living quality?
I think that the reason why Vienna has so many lessons to offer is the access to affordable housing. An affordable housing rent model is traditionally viewed as something that is a stepping stone. It's kind of for the dispossessed, the poor. The reality in Vienna is that 80% of the population is in rental accommodation, and 60% of that is commissioned by city government. And it's of outstanding quality, and a lot of it is quite experimental, very progressive, incorporating things like communal swimming pools. So I think that those cities that have really progressive lessons to offer, whether that's, as we've talked about, Vienna, I think Singapore, the quality of the public transport and the bicycle lanes is such that you really wouldn't want the hassle of getting in a car. And if you do get in a car, and there are access to a car, then the taxation system limits that. I think that all of those compact cities offer lessons and are in many ways very desirable destinations. London, I think, is also interesting, and interesting in the way that, I mean, the foundation was approached through the Forum of Mayors, which I'm the advocate for, the United Nations. I was approached by Harkey for a master plan of reconstruction. And everybody was saying around me, this is crazy. I mean, how can you be thinking about a master plan when you're 40 kilometers from the Russian border and you're being blasted every day? And my response was, London, as we know it, with the extraordinary green belt that protects it from sprawl, all of that was not necessarily created, but it was reinforced in the middle of World War II, as it was called the Abercrombie Plan. That was the author. It was endorsed by the King and Queen, who attended exhibitions. So the power of master planning, the lessons of those kind of cities that I've described are enduring.
Lord Foster, thank you so much for sharing your invaluable insights. Can you elaborate a little bit more on this recycling of buildings, please?
Well, we presented a building at COP26, which went beyond the as it were, the recommendations of the Paris Accord. And it was an industrial, ironically, it was a gas factory at the turn of the 19th to the 20th century. So it was the very epitome of a fossil fuel economy. And that's been recycled as a corporate headquarters. It also has extraordinary, the gardens are public gardens, so it's a bridge with the local community. The examples of the Reichstag, perhaps, is an interesting exercise in recycling. You wouldn't know it, but it is virtually a zero carbon building because it's using a combination of biomass, solar panels, deep down aquifers, thermal, and that agenda was set by, I can't say it was set by us, it wasn't part of the brief, but we implored the civic leaders and said, essentially, you should be setting an example to the nation with your building. And that was embraced. So I think I could give you many more examples of recycling, but I think the point is made by perhaps those two buildings.
Hello, it's a big pleasure to be here with you. I am a fan of you. We are from Peru. I am architect and professor of the Ricardo Palma University. And I would like to ask you about what do you think about the bioclimatic architecture? Why is important, for example, for the students?
By way of what?
No, what do you think about the bioclimatic architecture? And why is important, for example, for the students? Like me, because I am professor, but I would like to send to all my students your message, like the best architect.
Well, I think my message would be that a university is a center of learning, it's a center of culture, and it should be progressive, it should be showing the way. And there's no reason why a university shouldn't be ahead of standards. And when it commissions buildings to set very high environmental performance standards. We just visited a series of university buildings in and around Madrid from the 1950s. And there's one very, very interesting dormitory building. I don't think you could build it today with the building codes. It has outdoor balcony access. The accommodation is back to back. And that built in the 50s is 9 stories high. And it's alongside other more recent accommodation. And the students all want to live high in that building. So much so that they have a lottery, unlike any other building on the campus. So, and that building was built in a time of extreme austerity in Spain because the 1950s, they didn't have access to outside material. They had to build with what was literally available locally. And that, for me, was a real demonstration that in the end, it wasn't about how much you spent. It was about how wisely you spent it.
Hello, we're a party delegate from Mongolian government, and I wanted to ask, as Mongolia is has coldest capital city in the world, reaching -40 degrees Celsius in winter. It does, yes. But we are also at the same time rich in raw materials and mineral sources, as well as renewable energy resources. But we don't know how to package them into a sustainable city framework and involve a design thinking. I wanted to request whether we can participate in your 36-week trainings or get the trainings for our country's sustainable development.
We have one student from your area who's joining the course, so we're off to a little start.
Right, wonderful.
Yes, we welcome you.
That would be wonderful.
Please join.
Yes, we could use your knowledge and expertise. Thank you.
Thank you.
What was there? It's amazing discussion. I have a question. London, Vienna are already existing cities, and they're going through transformation now. What about NEOM, the city which is built from scratch, the smart city which is built from scratch? What's your opinion on this approach when you build from ground zero?
Sure.
Thank you, Lord Foster. My name is William Chan. I'm a city councillor. I'm also an architect, and I'm representing the Lord Mayor of Sydney here at COP. Sustainable cities concepts around urban planning, such as the 15-minute city and smart cities, are being attacked by conspiracy theorists. I myself have been abused, and I wonder, what's the role of the architect to combat misinformation and the conspiracy theorists that we see that's polarizing politics, but good urban design as well as good architectural concepts? How can we combat that?
Good luck.
Hi, my name is Thomas, and I'm from Roskilde, near Copenhagen, Denmark. And I wanted to know, you're now educating young people to be experts in sustainable cities, and that's really interesting. Can you comment on the way that we also need people to engage in the city development, and how does that merge up with the data-driven sustainable cities experts?
Three big questions, not a lot of time.
There are three questions, and there's one that I really hate to answer. But so I'll start with the easy ones. Nothing's easy, incidentally. Your question at the back is an excellent question about the so-called 15-minute city. If I were put in that position, I'd try and get a public forum. I'd try and get all those people who are feeding misinformation. I'd want to address them directly. And I'd address them from a point of their own knowledge. I'd say, hey, forget the 15-minute city. Forget the Paris branding. Look at that part of your city which has a high street, which has all the activities. Go there, I'll come with you, I'll show you. It's alive. Talk on the street. And what's the problem? It's polluted by the cars. We're not going to take the cars away. Those who have to drive there will drive there. But the cars will be put somewhere else so they're not running people over. And we're going to improve the public transport and reduce the dependence on the thing. But the so-called conspiracy theory 15-minute city, it's not new. It's been there for generations past. You've been misinformed. So I would try to use the power of advocacy and communication. And some of those skills I really believe can be taught. I was never taught how to do anything in terms of communication. I learned it the hard way. but it is teachable. You know, I'm looking at you. I'm not looking at a slide here. I'm trying to use a language which is not full of obscure intellectual words. I'm trying to bring it down to real life. The students in this course will be immersed in that. They will have to communicate their ideas face to face with the people that they've engaged with. It will be a test, and that's why it's exciting. The question in just remind me, it was how does one go beyond the architects and urban designers and those who know the realities? I think that we can use that technology that you got a glimpse of there. It was surrounded by students. Now imagine that is in a forum in the middle of a city, and it's an exhibition space, it's free admission, and everybody's talking about it because you can see a huge physical model of the city, and you can see in color the new developments that are coming along. And hey, there's a video display there, and somebody's demonstrating, and there's a community group of interest leaders. So you share that technology, and you demystify a lot of all this. So you try and break through all this nonsense about, you know, the ULEZ so-called 15-minute is a, you know, it's a new trend. I think it's highly dangerous, disagreeable. It can only be countered by an open spirit of sharing and common sense. Finally, the question that I hoped I'd never, ever be asked is, what do I think of the line? And I tell you why I don't like the question, is because I've never, ever criticized any other designers or architects and it's a bit late in my career to start now. So I don't want to take aim at it. All I would say is that a city and it's arguably mankind's greatest invention. And what do cities have in common? And why do cities always respond to crises and come back better? So cholera in the 19th century, and the realization that it was caused in many ways through dirty water, cleaned the Thames, created the reservoir that promoted and provoked Central Park as the green lung of New York, created the Thames embankment, modern sanitation. Now, all of these things would probably happen anyway, but it accelerated them. And even COVID, there's no question that our shared awareness of the benefits of nature, open air dining, enjoying parks, has been heightened by, and working from home. These were not new, but they've been accelerated. So all these cities have something called resilience, and it's like a network. And if you kind of cut one part of it, the overall network strengthens and reinforces. When a city is one line with no core and is dependent on a railway line, if something horrible happens or somebody has a bad intent, you only have to attack any part of that line and it immediately immobilizes it. So I've tried to come at it not from a smarter than thou or critical point of view, but just to link in why it's a difficult question for me.
Thank you so much for your time today, Lord Foster, and thank you, everyone. Please, there's a networking opportunity with coffee.
Thank you.